You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Alicia Menendez. The new issue of Time magazine takes a look at the relationship between Hispanics and the Evangelical Church. As these two growing communities join forces, what will this mean for America's religious traditions? Joining us to discuss, we have Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Conde Frazier, Dean of Esperanza College, Dr. Elizabeth Rios, Executive Pastor at Save the Nations, Danny Vargas, President of VARCOM Solutions, Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, President of the National Hispanic Leadership Conference. Thank you all so much for being here. All right, Reverend Dr. Conde Frazier, would you just tell me, what do you think is driving Latinos to the Evangelical Church?
To the Evangelical Church has always had a message of life. It's a life-giving place. People come together, there's community. People also are able to discuss new perspectives for their own lives because the Word of God is such an important piece for them. It brings new perspective. It brings a way for them to be able to adapt to a new environment. It brings a way for them to quickly connect with one another and create community. So the message and the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Reverend Rodriguez, I grew up Catholic. I grew up in an immigrant-rich community, and that was clearly at a point in time what drove people to the Catholic Church. These days, you know, many more are finding their religious home within the evangelical movement.
They are, because the evangelical movement offers a very holistic outlook as it pertains to both their relationship with God and their relationship with community. Basically, the evangelical church offers one the opportunity to reconcile the vertical and horizontal planes of the Christian message. So we have an opportunity to accept Jesus Christ.
What does that mean?
Oh, it means the cross is both vertical and horizontal, and many Christ followers have either focused on one plane or the other, the vertical, salvation through Christ, or others focused on societal transformation, be it education, healthcare, racism, equality, immigration. The cross is both vertical and horizontal. The evangelical community says it doesn't have to be either or, it could be both and. We can be both Billy Graham and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We can be both righteousness and justice, sanctification and service.
Yeah, Reverend Rodriguez, tell me, how does the Latino evangelical movement differ from just the mainstream evangelical movement?
Because we're both Billy Graham and Dr. King. Because we're not either or. In the 20th century, my white evangelical brothers and sisters were primarily vertical. Even when Dr. King marched to end segregation, the majority of white evangelicals stood on the sidelines and did very little. Then my African-American brothers and sisters focused on, and they needed to focus on issues of equality, ending segregation, healthcare, education, societal transformation. The Latinos come along and say, it's time to reconcile Billy Graham's message with Dr. King's march. So we are different because we're not going to go for one plane or the other. We're going to reconcile both, and we're going to hover around the nexus, the point of convergence where righteousness meets justice.
Right, and I imagine that is in many ways, as we all know, the Latino community very young. Average age of our community is about 27, which means I'm an old lady in Hispanic land, right? I mean, this is a young population, which means that you have not just Latinos, you have millennial Latinos who are showing up at this church. And so I imagine that everything that Reverend Rodriguez just laid out is very appealing to a generation of Americans that have been raised in a more diverse, in terms of social programs, a more socially progressive, all this conversation about healthcare, about immigration, community, than Latinos who were coming here 50, 60 years ago.
Well, there's also another piece about the Latino church, and that is that we are able to have leadership in the Latino church that is authentic. In other words, we don't have to depend on higher structures of the church to tell us what to do. We become the leaders of that church. We are the people in charge. We are able to make decisions for ourselves. So self-determination is a very important factor at this time, and particularly for the generation that you are speaking about. It's about being able to bring our own expression. It's about being able to be empowered. We are leaders who are empowering one another, who are learning to be leaders together. That's a very, very important piece. We are no longer persons who come to a country or who grow up in a country and want to see others tell us how we should do church, or tell us what it is that we are able to do when it comes to dealing with a budget. we want to be able to have that self-determination. That's an extremely important piece that is also a part of this discussion.
Yeah, and Dr. Rios, when we talk about empowerment, specifically Latinas facing tremendous amounts of support from this community, really finding their own voice in it.
That's right. More and more women have found a home within the Latino evangelical community. And also because historically the evangelical mindset had been one that was more individualistic and had a more personal element. But women were always more attracted to the social transformation piece, which is the outer directed and horizontal part of what the Latino evangelical community brings to the table. And since the 1940s, the Latina evangelical community were already addressing the issues and problems of society. They were already challenging the system. They just didn't have a label for it, and no one was taking notice of it until now, because the sleeping giant has awakened. But women have always been a strong backbone when it comes to the Latino evangelical community. They've been a powerful force, and you mentioned earlier about the younger generation, and it's the women of the backbone that have actually created this activist generation, because now more and more Latinos have found their voice, and they're able to say we have a part not only on the sidelines of the table, as Reverend Rodriguez mentioned, but we have a voice and we have a part on the table, and we've created this young, emerging Latina and Latino activist generation that are very interested in addressing the systemic structural sins that, for the most part, in the past decades, was not something that the evangelical mindset approached.
Yeah, I mean, Danny, you and I both grew up Catholic, and even though I grew up Catholic and I went to Sunday school, every Wednesday my mom would get rid of me by allowing me to go with my friend Crystal to her church. And at her church, there was dancing and there was singing and it was fun and there was a sense of community. And I was Missionette of the Year, 1994. Thank you very much. Learned to read the Bible beginning to end. And then every Sunday I'd go to Catholic church and have to sit through a homily that wasn't uplifting, that wasn't spiritual, where someone just sort of yelled at you for 15, 20 minutes. And so just that, I see how there is a big difference between these two churches. I wonder, do Catholics have to be reading this Time magazine piece and getting really nervous about their flock?
Well, I think, well, at the same token, that there are millions of Latinos that are flocking to the evangelical church. Part of what Pastor Rodriguez was talking about in terms of the ability to have sort of that personal relationship with God, where the evangelical church offers the opportunity to have sort of a 64 colors crayon box of what that means to you individually. I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's very uplifting for many of them. But I think also for millions of Latinos, they see the Catholic Church and the traditions of the church as something that really provides a level of stability in their lives. A church that has 2,000 years of history from St. Peter to today. And I think seeing Pope Francis come to the forefront now as someone that comes from Latin America, who's sensitive to the sensibilities that we have as Catholics. I think Matthew 25 is what drives us. I think the fact that you know, we are there to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, that Jesus tells us that what you do for the least among us, you do to me. I think those are the types of things that drive Catholics. And even in the sacraments, where we have the ability to every Sunday ingest what we believe to be the actual body and blood of Christ, that provides us a direct link as a community to be able to hold faith with those traditions that we hold dear. Not taking anything away from the evangelical brothers and sisters that we have, but it is those levels of traditions that we hold dear that really provide us a rock on which we can stand.
Yeah, Dr. Conde Frazier, I'm just curious, though, do you think that the lessons that we're now learning from the growth of the Hispanic evangelical movement will ultimately be applied to other institutions, to other religions?
I think that it's going to definitely influence. It's a part of religion. Is not we can't just take religion and take it aside as a box all by itself. Religion is a part of culture. It's a part of who we are as persons. It's a part of our everyday life. That's why the vertical piece that Reverend Samuel spoke about is such an important piece. But also, it's about that vertical piece that, as Latinos, we did not go through the time of doing away with the spiritual life and the spiritual dimension. We didn't do away with that. We didn't do enlightenment the way everybody else did. To us, we continued to believe these pieces, and they were very much a part of our lives. And so you need to have both of these pieces in order to make for a vibrant community. And I think that what the evangelical church does, it integrates. It's very holistic. It integrates everything. It's a panoramic perspective, whereas you have other religions that will do the either-or pieces. We do the both-and pieces. And that's a very important piece. People are looking to have a sense of shalom, a sense of complete wholeness, well-being of all of the different dimensions, because that's what life is about. And that's what I meant before when I said life-giving. Now, in order for us to take that to the next level, I think, one of the things that is important is for us to ask, how is it that then we have a different kind of dialogue between the different religions where Latinos are a part? Can we have that dialogue in different ways than what we have in the past? Does this have to be a competitive piece, or can we take some of the traditions that our brother has spoken about, and can we bring those and say, you know, these things can unite us? We all are living the same reality in the United States, and therefore we understand that we have to address that reality. And we all have the same vibrant sense of wanting to bring life to the Latino community, the sense of justice and so forth. Can we have a dialogue that allows us together to address those pieces?
Yeah, Reverend Rodriguez, you know, so often we do the sign of peace and we just sort of roll through it, but we forget it is this amazing moment in our congregations where we actually connect with our neighbors. And I'm curious, do you see in your own congregation that sort of cross-cultural understanding, because you are bringing different communities together under the umbrella of faith?
By the grace of God. I happen to have the privilege of pastoring a very multi-ethnic, what I call kingdom culture church. It's 70% African-American, 20% Anglo, 5% Pacific Islander, and then 5% Latino. Ironically, Latino is the smallest group of my congregation. But my brother Vargas, 3 weeks ago, we held a historic meeting in Washington, D.C., Latino evangelical leaders with Latino Catholic leaders, all in one room, discussing common ground issues. And really, I sensed the Spirit of God there, the spirit of love and of just working together, cooperation under the great canopy of Christendom. So even though there is a reformation, which is the term that I gave to the reporter at Time Magazine, it's undercover, it is a reformation. It's not a reformation to segregate. It's a reformation to facilitate a platform for collaboration and cooperation, even of our Catholic brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And I would agree. I would also add the fact that, you know, it's really important that we not categorize folks or stereotype folks into one category or another. I think there are social issues that drive many folks, whether they be evangelical or Catholic, but there are also some very pragmatic issues that around being able to provide a better opportunity for all of those that are struggling. But I think from a political perspective, we see that they can advantage either one party or the other. We saw that Governor Romney lost the Catholic vote by a small margin, but he lost that Catholic vote because he was not able to define a message that really talked to Catholics about how it is that his message was about helping the poor. Yeah. Had he been able to do that, had he been able to talk about not just the social issues that compel a lot of voters, but also that pragmatic way how his view of the world would actually provide a better outcome for those struggling families, I think that was something that was a missed opportunity for him as a candidate and for his party that continues to struggle with how do we provide a message that provides aspiration and opportunity and hope for those communities.
Yeah, it's really hard when you're talking about self-deportation, right, Reverend Rodriguez? I mean, that's part of what he had to learn, which is that even if some of the more socially conservative values lined up, the values around unity and around community did not.
I have this crazy dream that Hispanic evangelicals, Latino evangelicals, will emerge as the quintessential independent voting bloc in America. I don't want to see Latino evangelicals married to the donkey or the elephant. I want us exclusively married to the agenda of the Lamb. I want us to be politically independent so we can prophetically speak into both parties. There are things from both the Democrats and the Republicans that we resonate with, and there are things from the Republicans and Democrats that we don't resonate with. So I think we have an opportunity of redeeming or helping redeem both narratives, pushing both Republicans and Democrats more towards a centrist vertical and horizontal approach.
And if we do that, we will have done it with by giving them a sense of the ethic of life. I think that's an important piece. When we bring those two together, we become prophetic. We're able to be prophetic. So,
but I think the Democrats also have a risk factor here. If they move further and further away from some basic fundamental faith principles and closer to secularism, I think they run the risk of being able to lose a lot of the Latino religious activities. So
can you be more specific,
Reverend Rodriguez
Danny?
is right. I mean, I think Reverend Rodriguez is right. There has to be a balance that's struck by both parties.
Danny, can you just be more specific on that when you're talking about Democrats moving towards secularism? What exactly you're talking about?
Well, I would say that there are some of the social issues that we face. So not to disrespect those folks that have faith-based beliefs. I think that's part of it. So I think some of the rhetoric that's around, those folks that are holding on to their Bibles, I think that's a disrespectful tone. So I think, as both parties talk to those of us that have a level of faith, they need to be respectful of the fact that there are folks that have differing opinions and not belittle those beliefs. I think that's where they run the risk.
As a pastor, this past election was a very polarizing one, and even in my own congregation, the things that I saw happening was really sad. And one of the reasons for that was because people became single-issue voters, and for Latino evangelicals, that's just not going to fly anymore. We want people to understand that there are so many other issues that are relevant to us, and we do not want to be categorized by Democratic or Republican. That's why most, especially by younger bilingual, bicultural Latino evangelicals are defining themselves, if they have to give themselves a label because they do not want to be labeled, are more independent. This is a group that will need to be courted, and there are going to be issues that are more important to them than, just taking care of that it aligns directly with everything in the Bible, because everybody forgets that the poor is mentioned many, many times throughout the Word of God. And that was one of the biggest issues that came up in this past election. So that's one of the ways, if we're able to do what Reverend Rodriguez and Dr. Conde Frazier mentioned, that's one of the ways that Latino evangelicals will essentially affect American religious traditions, because if we're able to stop making this such a polarizing issue and be able to say, let's all come together, let's see where our differences are, but let's also look at, like giving a plug to Reverend Rodriguez's book, The Agenda of the Lamb. What's the most important thing here? What would God want us to do in this situation? Because it's not as easy as Republican and Democrat. It never has been, and it will continuously never be.
Reverend, did you pay her extra to say that?
I did not. I was about to offer her a caramel macchiato from Starbucks, but no, Liz is wonderful. Liz is not because she's complimenting the book, but she's been featured on cover of magazines as a Hispanic church planter, a female, where she's pushing back against the idea of machismo in the Hispanic culture. So I want to be like Liz when I grow up.
I think we all do. What's funny to me when we talk about millennial Latinos is the fact that truly we don't know anything about us, right? I mean, there are some data points that we have collected, but ultimately there are these huge questions about acculturation and how, after generations and generations, things that right now we use as markers of the Latino community, certain social perspectives, certain leanings, we might just become Americans, like all other Americans, where there is no longer the hyphenation. I mean, do you buy that, Reverend Rodriguez, or you think that we can actually read the tea leaves on this by how we're acting right now?
I don't know. I listened to, for example, a segment of the Latino community. The second largest in America would be the Puerto Rican community. And you see the Puerto Rican community 3, 4, 5 generations into it, you still ask them, what are you? And they'll say, I'm Boricua. I'm Puerto Rican, and they've been here for 70, 80 years. I do still think that in the Latino community, there is this commitment of both and, like Dr. Frazier said before. It's not either or, it's both and. So I think, yes, we're becoming more American every generation more and more. Does that mean that we completely sacrifice our Latino culture, our Latino optics on the altar of cultural expediency? Do we do that, and do we have to do that? My concern is, by becoming more American, do we become less Christian, and do we let go of our faith? And that's the question that we have to answer. I don't have the answer to that, but it concerns me.
Right, and I think it also depends on your definition of Christianity. I want to bring in this comment from Peter Montgomery, who says, polls find that most Latinos are pro-gay rights, pro-marriage equality. Dr. Conde Frazier, I mean, that is a millennial position, right? We see a generational shift in questions of marriage equality. How do you reconcile that with having a very young congregation?
You're speaking to Elizabeth Rios.
Oh, to anybody. But I asked you, but anybody who wants to answer.
Well, I have children who are of that generation, and when we talk about what the church is about, one of the things, I want to go back to something that Reverend Rodriguez said. It's not so much about we're becoming American, like American is something that's over there, and I have to sort of cross the line and become that thing that's on the other side. I think that what Latinos are doing is that they're redefining what it is to be American in the United States. I think it's not that we're crossing over.
I think that's true, too. I think there are going to be a lot of non-Latino girls who are going to have quinceañeras in Texas somewhere.
Absolutely. But going back to your other question, as we redefine those pieces, we're also redefining what it means to be Christian humanity. I think that the critical thinking that this millennium brings to us, this new generation brings to us, they bring a critical thinking to the issues that have been traditional issues for us, things that we use religion in order not to have to talk about them. And this generation has said, no, we will no longer do that. We want to uncover these pieces. We want to really talk about this at an in-depth level. And so they are not at the traditional places. They're having much deeper discussions about it, which I think brings them to what Christ is about. Christ came in order so that holiness is not something that's about being heaven-bound. Holiness is about being the best human being that we can possibly be, and that's being a new creation. And I think that's where this new generation is moving us. As the older generation, they're making us have to rethink a lot of these pieces.
I would also add, though, that I think from a conceptual perspective, I think, that what is an American? I think the old idea of the melting pot that is America, I think that's sort of gone by the wayside. It's not so much a melting pot anymore. Now it's more of a stew or a sancocho, as I would call it. There's room for all kinds of folks with all kinds of beliefs and all kinds of perspectives, cultural and otherwise. So I think the more that we're able to do that and still be part of a homogeneous pot, I think that's for the betterment of our country and our society. I think we all add something to that sancocho, a bit of flavor, a bit of perspective, and I think that's probably the best way to look at it. Not so much the melting pot of the stew.
But if you have a generation of young Latinos, right, who are on this one particular issue, just to take one issue, moving in a very progressive direction, as is the rest of the country, is the church, then is the movement willing to internalize that change as part of its evolution? I find this idea that Dr. Conde Frazier laid out very appealing, of the fact that this is not a top-down church, this is a bottom-up church. Does that then leave it enough room to evolve?
The Latino community is very diverse, and within that diversity, there's a great scope of where we can evolve. And I think that we're beginning to see that as we become more multicultural. Look at Reverend Rodriguez Church. Look how multicultural it is. Latinos are moving from just these, Latino-only enclaves. They're moving to more multicultural spaces. They're intermarrying. They're looking at different perspectives and so forth. They're remaking what it means to have a Latino identity. And as they do that, they are becoming the church. They're creating their own space in the church. And as such, they are creating new spaces in the scope of what the Latino church is. Rather than leaving it, they're creating new spaces in that scope.
But you understand what I'm saying. I mean, Dr. Rios, I'd love to get your take on this, which is there's still a belief that an institution puts forward. We know how the Catholic Church, for example, feels on a question like marriage equality. And if you bring Catholics on, they will talk to you about the fact that that is rooted in Scripture, that comes from story teachings of the church. And yet what I'm hearing here is that there is potentially room for the institutions themselves to evolve, not just to carve out pockets, but to actually have the entirety of it reconform. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's an issue that's been discussed and continues to be discussed. It's something that make some people, create a safe havens where they can actually ask the questions, because in many evangelical institutions at one time, just asking the question was something that was taboo. And we've evolved to a place now where it's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to have discourse around these hot topics that many of us don't see eye to eye on. But nevertheless, we know that it's important to the discussion, especially for our younger Latinos. It's very interesting, though, because we have evolved, and I think that there's something that we need to say for all the people that think that evangelicals are closed-minded. I've read many comments, even prior to coming on. I saw some things that some people have written, and we're not closed-minded. We're, again, the agenda is what is Jesus saying, and at the end of the day, we're open. We have become more open to discuss the future of evangelical Christianity, because there is increasingly more bilingual, bicultural, multi-ethnic adjustments that we've had to make to our programming, to our outreach, to the way that we do our church programming, that it's more activist generation approach. And again, at the end of the day, we found a voice. We have found that we have a place at the table, and we're unrelenting. We are what I wrote about being progressive Pentecostals, and that's what the evangelical mindset is more about. That we want social transformation that is outer-directed, that is horizontal, that is making a difference, that is noticeable, that it's challenging the structural powers. And yes, we know that the hot topics of the day are marriage equality and the immigration issue, but this is not all that can define the Latino evangelical agenda. There's so much more that we can talk about, that we have voice in, and the main thing is that we have evolved, that we have found a place where people can speak on these issues, because so many decades ago that wasn't an opportunity. So now our young people do find a place to talk about this and to think, because so many people have thought that evangelicals check their brain at the door because they don't think. And as Reverend Conde Frazier had mentioned, they have used the word as the ultimate source to say, I'm not going to think because this is what it says. Now we know that we can. We can talk about it and bring the Bible alongside our convictions and say, how does this relate to the world that we live in today? And how is this the agenda that God wants us to forge ahead with?
I want to read you guys this last comment from Alba, who says, as Latinos evolve, I believe we need to reach beyond the four walls and become more accepting of those that are different than we are. Christ lived among the fringes of society. Why do we remain so stringent? Somebody wanted to jump in before we go.
Well, no, Alicia, I wanted to jump in and just say it's important to make a distinction between the three categories. One, the church as an institution and what it teaches and what it adheres to. Two would be the individual and what the individual chooses to do in their own lives. And three is also what we choose to advance in terms of governing principles, right? There's a distinction between the church and the way a government functions in society. So it's okay for example, the Catholic Church to have a position as it relates to gay marriage or abortion and so forth. It's okay for an individual to have certain beliefs on topics like that. But it's okay also to have a situation where, from a governing policy perspective, those government policies might be different than those first two. So make that distinction between those two things. Don't assume that a Catholic who might personally have a belief as it relates to gay marriage, for example, that they have to then translate that into the way that they advance public policy.
Right, but Danny, see, I totally agree with you, and yet I've had so many Catholic panels on where they've told me that if I believe in a woman's right to choose, if I believe in marriage equality, then I ought to just go find another church, because there's no way to reconcile my personal beliefs with the church's beliefs. So while I agree with your vision of it, there are a lot of institutional people within the Catholic institutions that disagree with our approach.
I disagree with that. I think someone who is a pro-life Catholic might be able to say, from a governing perspective, that there should be rights and abilities afforded to folks. That it doesn't necessarily have to be something where you can still be pro-life and say, I want to find a way to minimize abortions without it being an illegal function within government policies. That being pro-life also means that you have to find alternatives to those things that you think that you might be personally against. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You do have to be able to find a way to be able to advance those things that you hold dear.
Reverend Rodriguez, I'm going to give you the last word before we go.
The Latino Reformation is here. The Latino Reformation is here to stay. I am convinced that Latinos are not just here, these immigrants, these first-generation immigrants are not here just to save their families and households and futures. They may very well end up being the salvation of American Christianity in the 21st century.
All right, I want to thank you all so much for joining us, Dr. Conde Frazier, Dr. Rios, Danny, and Reverend Rodriguez. This conversation continues here at HuffPost Live.